Hello and welcome to another episode of HCAM's original series, Business Matters. I'm Tim Kilduff. It's been a while since we last did a show, but we're happy to be back in the studio. This program is produced to introduce you to people who own and operate local businesses in and around Hopkinton. We're actually not here to discuss their work as much as we are to discuss why they do what they do. But we also like to work in why people were attracted to Hopkinton. Why do they spend their time, energy, and do what they do, and particularly around this community? So today I'm looking forward to having a conversation with Peter Thomas. You know, Peter, I want to get the title right. Is it owner, editor, publisher of HopNews? What is it?
It's all of those. Owner, editor, publisher. I think typically in the functionary aspect of it, I think of myself as the editor. From the business side of it, the commercial aspect, I think of it as publisher.
Well, you're not originally from Hopkinton. You don't have to go back to your date of birth, but give us a little update, a little background on you and sort of the professional experience, and then we can talk a little bit about local news.
Sure.
And covering local activities, I should say.
Sure. So, I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and my wife and I raised our kids there until 2015 when we moved to Hopkinton, which is a long way away. We were really looking for something different. We had lived in Seattle all our lives, and our families are there. And we thought, it would be so cool to live somewhere else for a change. And initially, I lobbied for Denmark. I thought, this would be amazing. I tried to sell the kids on the fact that everybody rides a bike and they love chocolate and cheese, but nobody was taking it. So we ended up staying in the States. And, we started looking at Massachusetts. We specifically started looking at schools, and we realized that Hopkinton schools were amazing. And so we started concentrating our efforts there. We owned a software company at the time, and so we had the luxury of being able to work anywhere we wanted. So we moved in 2015, and we lived just out by Lake Whitehall. It was, I think, August of 2015 when we got here, and we registered our kids for soccer, and the next thing we knew, we just kind of were plugged into the community because we met people on the sidelines, and that was right when the library was doing the fundraising. And we went to the Hoptoberfest, if you remember that.
Sure.
And so we met a ton of people there, and it was just so great the way we got plugged in. I mean, there were just so many great people that were smart and super nice and had kids about the same age, and so it was wonderful. It was a good blessing.
Oh, good. I've got a Joe Biden question I have to ask you.
Sure.
It's not about ice cream.
Okay.
Seattle, coffee.
Yes.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
Would you like to offer an opinion?
Yeah. Yes. This is probably more controversial than anything I'll print. When we moved here, I was surprised at the lack of options for coffee because Seattle, the Northwest, is kind of known for that, and people here are content to have Dunkin' Donuts. They like that, and I think it's good coffee on a cold day. For me, I'm a bit snobbier than that. I have at times. Ground my own beans at the French press. I recently just switched to decaf though, so yes, I know it's a big thing, and
wow.
But I went through the week of detox, but I actually sleep a lot better now, and so I'm trying to wean myself of that coffee addiction.
Wow. Owns a software company that from scratch built it?
Yeah. I was 26. I had worked for a number of companies. I worked for Microsoft. I worked for Boeing. I worked for a couple of dot-com startups. And I had learned to write code when I was a kid. I think I was about 8 when I started. I was 8 when I wrote my first program. So I was reasonably competent by the time I got out of high school. So when I was 26, I started a software company. And then my first client was my wife, actually. She was a vice president of marketing at Washington Mutual Bank, which was a pretty sizable regional bank. And I wrote a program for her department, and that's how we met. Eventually, she came and joined me in the company, and then we continued to build it, and then we sold it in 2019.
So you've seen all of that all the way through, beginning to selling the company. What in your background suited you to be able to do that? Were you just simply entrepreneurial, or was your education background in business development, economic development?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was a one-man show for a long time as a software developer. I would do projects for companies, and then I realized, gosh, I have more work than I can do myself, so I hired another developer and another developer. And then eventually I figured out that I could hire people to do the things that I either wasn't good at in the business or that I didn't want to do. The CEO part of the business was something that I grew into. Again, I was a software guy, right? But talking to people has been easy to me for a long time. And so a lot of that CEO stuff is how you build a team, how you cultivate a team and culture in a company, and then how do you present that to your prospects and your customers. So I had a CEO coach. I read lots and lots of books. I watched lots of YouTube videos and just really tried to learn and absorb as much as I could about that side of the business, which I kind of shied away from for a long time because I wanted to say, no, I'm a technical guy. That's what I do. I write code. But I realized that my customers were demanding that I take on a different role there. And so eventually I got out of that part of the business, and then I was just working on business development, operational stuff, the sales team, that kind of thing. So yeah, that wasn't something that I approached it kind of in a different way. I didn't say, I'm going to start a business and here's my business plan and then I'm going to go execute it. It was much more organic than that. It was more like, I knew I could do something, and gosh, it feels pretty good to work for myself and not somebody else, so I think I'll just keep doing this for a while. And then it grew and grew and grew into something larger.
Tell me a little bit more about it. I would think, I've tended to live on the East Coast. I think making a decision, it's a pretty bold move to go from Seattle to the East Coast. Tell me a little bit about that.
So, without demeaning any of my West Coast friends, here's what I think about living in New England. When we got here, it felt like home. Like it felt like we're somewhere where the people understand us and we understand the people. Some of my observations are New Englanders are very provincial. So if you have somebody, for example, that lives on one side of town and they decide to move to another side of town, that's a big deal for them. That can be a big deal for them. When you're in the West, everything is regionalized. So it would not be unusual for us to drive 30 minutes to go see some friends for dinner. But here, it's like, oh, you live in Upton? Gosh, that's a long way. I'm not sure I want to meet you. You know what I mean? So there is that in New England, and it's very interesting. I think also, I know New Englanders have a rap for being a bit, I don't want to say cold, but like it's hard to get to know them and stuff like that. I didn't find that at all. I think actually people are welcoming here. I felt like that, especially in Hopkinton. What I noticed is that there isn't a lot of passive aggressivism here. People are, you either like them or you don't, and it's okay to not like them if you don't. And you know what I mean? And in Seattle and in the West Coast, I think there's a bit more, you'll say hi to people and be friendly to people that you really wouldn't hang out with otherwise, right? It's a bit more passive aggressive. And, for somebody like me, it's that's hard to deal with because I'm very upfront. You just kind of see what you see. And I don't have a lot of time for silliness.
Well, then you come to Hopkinton. There's the community. You've obviously studied the community before you get here.
Yes.
Before you got here.
Yeah.
You made that decision. I'm interested in you found this entity called HopNews.
So,
I mean, obviously you click on, you get on HopNews.
Sure. Yeah, so, I ran, when we moved here from 2015 to 2019, I was still running my company, so I sold the company, and then I had a 2-year contract with them to stay. So it was 2021 when I actually exited out of the business. And then I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and I'm a little too young to retire still, I think, and there's only so much golf somebody can play. And so we were looking around and kind of thinking, like, what is the next move? And I like to read the news, and I will confess I wasn't big into town politics. I didn't really know a lot of folks in town until this job. But I was reading The Independent one day, and I was sitting at my desk, and I was also reading HopNews, just catching up. And I thought HopNews, there was an opportunity. I saw it, and I thought there was an opportunity to improve the experience. I saw that the coverage model could be a little bit different. I thought the UI, the look and feel of it was a bit old, kind of outdated, and I thought that there would be an opportunity. So I reached out to the publisher, who I didn't know, and just said, hey, would you ever like to talk about this? So we spent a couple of months and going back and forth and doing diligence, and we closed the deal on December 2nd last year, 2022.
Look, Robert Falcione, expended, committed, served the community, provided a service. People might be interested. Have you stayed in touch? How's he doing?
Good. Yeah, I have stayed in touch with him. We were just texting yesterday. Bob, I agree. He provided a valuable service to the community for almost 20 years, or 20 years. Bob had his fans and he had his detractors, like anybody in this business. But I do believe that, in the end, people were more informed and better off than they would have been otherwise, because he offered a different point of view. Bob has, since gone into retirement, but we have stayed in touch. I mean, he consulted for us for a little while after the transition, just to make sure that we, knew where all the bodies were buried, as it were. And then after that, as different stories have come up that he has had interest in, and he's texted me, and I've said, oh yeah, or I've asked him, hey, do you know who I could talk to about something? So yeah.
Good. So at the moment he's well.
He's well, yes.
Good.
He is well.
Your interest in, lack of a better term, covering community activities. You're a journalist now.
I reluctantly accept that, but I think that's true.
What in your background would lead anyone to think that you might end up doing what you're doing at the moment?
Well, before I started my company, and I think what I omitted from the life story part was that I did work for a local weekly paper, very similar to the Independent, in my community, and that was after school. I did that. I wrote the sports. I was the sports desk. I wrote the sports column for them, and I also sold ads for them. Now, I did fairly quickly realize that the economics of local journalism were not going to support the aspirations that I had, and so that's when I decided to do something different. But it did give me good visibility into how a newsroom operates. Now, this is back when we're laying the paper out by hand.
Right.
And it was a weekly like the Independent. It went to your mailbox whether you wanted it or not, that kind of thing, supported by ad revenue. The cadence of that is interesting to me, especially when you have a deadline and you're going to print. Now, HopNews is different. It's just every day, or as it needs to be updated as stories break. But I always love that part. And the other thing I guess I would say is that writing is easy for me. For whatever reason, writing comes easy to me. I wrote a book while I was at my company. I spent some time, about a year and a half, writing a book. And so there's that part of it is not hard for me. And I really enjoy storytelling. And I think that's the other piece, the way I try to differentiate between the Independent. I think the Independent does a very admirable job of reporting the news. This is what happened, and this is the chronology of it. I think that HopNews differentiates in that we kind of fill the gaps, that we cover topics that they wouldn't cover, and we also try to weave it more into a this is what happened and this is how we got here kind of story. And now it's up to the community to decide how they feel about that.
What's the subject of the book you wrote?
It's called Marketing Multiplied. And it was a book on channel marketing, which is, that was the field of expertise that my company, that was the audience we served, were channel marketers.
So I've lived in the town for a few years, and people might take umbrage with this, but the community's been blessed by having HopNews, The Independent. HCAM has news capacity, covers local events. And at one point, up until fairly recently, we had a reporter at the Metro West Daily News. It was essentially embedded in Hopkinton, covered Hopkinton on a daily basis. We've lost that. So I'm interested in how much passion you have and how important it is for the entities that still exist here to be strong, vibrant, and continuing to deliver service.
Yeah, I think that's a really important topic. I did write an article, I think it was about 5 weeks ago, called How Craigslist Killed Local News. It didn't really have a lot to do with Hopkinton. It was just something, it was on my mind because I had been reading about the decline of advertising. And local news in print form has primarily, for 100 years, been driven by classified advertising. People would pay to say, I'm going to sell this car, and people would go on and find cars that way. And at one point, in I think 2003, Craigslist started, and that entire model was disrupted. And newsrooms started to close. In the last 17 years, 2,200 local newspapers have closed in this country. And the number of reporters has been halved. That presented an opportunity for a company like Gannett Media, who owned USA Today, to go and acquire local papers like the Milford Daily News, like the Framingham Metro West Daily News, and many others. I think they own 50 or 60 in Massachusetts. And the model is very simple. They buy the paper, they put up a paywall, so everybody has to pay to get access to the articles now, and they centralize the newsroom. They'll take a region and say, okay, well, all of Hopkinton, Milford, Holliston are all going to be covered out of one newsroom in Framingham. Yesterday, I went to pick up some food at Oliva's in Milford, and the Milford Daily News is sitting there on their table, and the headline story is the Denver Nuggets won the NBA championship, which is newsworthy, I agree, but in Milford, I don't know that that really makes a lot of sense. So I have a sort of philosophical objection to the idea that people are content with reading national news only. I think it's ultimately corrosive to our politics if we're only talking about national news items, especially when we get into political elections, where the questions now become things that don't really have anything to do with kitchen table issues for Hopkinton voters, but are something that you might hear on CNN or Fox. So I fundamentally believe that the right way to do it is to have local reporting on issues that really matter to voters here. And I am passionate about that, and I am also unafraid to present that. I mean, candidly, I think that it's so important that we really know what's going on, and ultimately not just what happened, but what it means to you.
We could very quickly get into sort of local issues, which is, and we should talk about that. Not necessarily now, but we should come back and talk about that, sort of local issues. Since you've moved into the town, since you and your family moved into town, and then we can talk about long term your objective for building the business that you have here. What surprised you after you moved here? Is there anything that has surprised you?
Well, I have a very silly answer to that. The coldness of the way. The winter surprised me. But in terms of the town itself, I was surprised by how welcoming people were, because I didn't expect that. I hadn't been around that. From a news standpoint, what surprises me, I guess in the last 5 months, what surprises me is that there are really two Hopkintons. There is the Hopkinton that we present or had presented, amazing schools, which is true, people that really care and come together, also true, the marathon, all of these wonderful, emblematic components of our community. Those are all there and exist and are true. I think what has surprised me is to learn that there is also a history of Hopkinton where backroom deals were done, where people made decisions that maybe they thought were the right decision at the time, but ultimately turned out to be very wrong and harmful decisions. That is what I have been surprised by in the last couple of months.
Were you at all aware of, I guess I call it central, maybe not geographically, but pretty close. Hopkinton really is a geographic center of New England. Were you aware of that when you made the decision to come here? Or it was mostly schools and the quality of the community?
Yeah, and to add a little more color to that, we were also looking, because we didn't know anybody here, we were looking in Concord, we were looking in Sherburne, we were looking in other communities as well that also have great schools and a semi-rural environment. We had the great luxury of not having to commute to Boston. I mean, my only commute was to Logan, to fly out to Seattle or San Francisco or wherever I was going to go see my customers or my employees. So knowing that gave us a lot of flexibility. And it ultimately came down to, we saw a house and we said, hey, this is a neat house, and does anybody know anything about Hopkinton? And then we started researching it and found out, wow, what a great community this is.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up the fact you didn't have to commute to Boston, which to me seems to be getting more and more challenging. And I don't know what kind of impact that'll have on Hopkinton long term. I have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball. But there's activity happening around this community, like, and I'm not so sure people are really aware of the work that's being done on the intersection of 495 and the Mass Pike, for example. I worked in Boston for years, and you could get on the Mass Pike at the Sheraton Tower in Framingham at 7, even after 7:30, and be in town in less than an hour. That doesn't happen anymore.
No, and I think that speaks to obviously the population growth of the Metro West region. But you know, there's bad traffic everywhere. I mean, there's really bad traffic on the West Coast. Even when you had cities that were grid-based, where the roads were not designed for carriages, where they were actually designed for cars, you still have some of the worst traffic. So I think that it ultimately just comes down to, there's just a lot of people in a small amount of space, no matter what, and we are constrained geographically here by many factors.
They are. So with the time that we have left, let's focus on the small business that you are now running, owner, publisher, editor, you know, on and on and on. What's your vision? What's your hope? Do you hope to multiply this, do this in other towns? Do you stay focused, or do you have a strategy?
So my strategy for this is, the first thing I wanted to do is just learn the business. I had a lot of ideas. I do have a lot of ideas about where it can go. What is, I think, unique about me is that I ran a marketing and a software company for a long time, and so I approach this a little differently than somebody who has come from a print or a journalism background. One of the things that we, on day one, offered our clients was, of course, you can do display advertising, the tile ads that you see on HopNews, but we also offered paid content, we also offered video production, graphic design, other marketing services that I know that that are not available to them, or that they're paying somebody else for. And so there are other revenue streams to the business than beyond just a display ad. I think I want to, of course, learn the motion of the business and continue to do that over the course of this year and maybe even partly into next year. But what I think we have demonstrated is that there is an appetite for the kind of coverage that we offer. And I'm saying that not because I hear it anecdotally, but because I can see it in the metrics. One of the things to Bob's credit is that he had years and years of historical traffic to the website. So I knew about how many people read the Hop News every day. And I also know what that looks like now. And it's up 342% as of last week, which means to me that he had a solid foundation, and that's great, but with the change in the coverage model, that's created more interest. and it's opened people's eyes to another point of view that they couldn't get anywhere else. So my premise is that that problem, or that appetite rather, exists in other communities as well. And I think the model is to either acquire or expand into covering other communities, adjacent communities. A good case in point is the Holliston paper, which, according to their website, and I've talked to the editors, is going out of business in August. They don't have anybody to buy it. They've asked me if I'll take it over. And at this point, I have been reluctant to do so because I don't have anybody to cover Holliston, and I don't know anything about that town. But that's a good example. There are lots of papers like that, lots of regionals like that, that I think would benefit from a marketing focus for the advertisers, and then a content focus that is more oriented around what people in the community really want to read.
Wow. You've thought about this?
A little
thought
bit.
about it.
A little bit.
Oh, that's exciting. Peter, I'm sure you've come across interesting people, interesting businesses, people doing really good things. And I think you're another example of that. What happens in Hopkinton in these various businesses here are quite frankly impressive. And I think you're going to add to that community.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us, I guess it's a little late to say welcome, but welcome.
Thank you.
And we'll continue to be in touch, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for joining us today. I hope you found this conversation interesting and informative. For more information and episodes of Business Matters, you'll find us on the station's website, hcam.tv. Until next time, see you around Hopkinton.
Like the Milford Daily News, like the Framingham Metro West Daily News, and many others. I think they own